Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
California's had some pretty big issues prior to the pandemic, and they're sure to be here after the pandemic is over. What are our state legislators doing to address those issues? First, we'll get the Democratic perspective from 2 Valley Democratic legislators, Democratic State Senator Ana Caballero and Democratic State Assembly Member Rudy Salas. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. Senator Caballero, let me ask you first. One of the big issues that was confronting the state prior to the pandemic was housing and homelessness. It's going to be here after the pandemic is over. How do we solve those problems?
You're absolutely right. The estimates range between 1.5 to 3.5 million housing units short. So this is not a problem we're going to solve overnight. It's something we need to start moving on. And so there's 2 issues. One is the homelessness issue, which is significantly different than the housing crisis. And the production of housing is the solution to both of them. But the homelessness crisis has a lot of other issues related to mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues, and that's going to take a longer time to resolve. In regards to the housing crisis, there are a number of issues. The Senate put together a housing task force that created a whole series of bills. One of the bills that I'm carrying as part of that group is SB 6 this year. And what it does is it permits the development of housing in commercial zones, commercial and retail zones, like those old strip malls and the malls. What we've seen is people now are starting to spend their money on the internet, and a lot of these stores are going bankrupt, particularly in rural California. And so it provides an opportunity to create a village where you can have a walkable community, and really we're building up, not out, and we're saving ag and range land and parkland.
Yeah, you can repurpose those malls and have it a mixed use situation. Really interesting. Assemblyman Salas, what is your take? Housing and homelessness is not, a lot of people think it's a coastal issue. It's not. It's affecting Valley communities. What is your prescription on how to address those issues?
Yeah, no, these issues didn't go away. They're still here, right? I know we talk about COVID and the pandemic and vaccines now, but all these other issues, homelessness, housing, still remain issues that we need to tackle. I know even in the governor's proposed budget, he's proposed $1.75 billion, to buy, like, for instance, the Project Home Key, where it was converting a lot of the old motels and turning them into like affordable housing units for the homeless. And we saw that in a number of communities up and down the entire Central Valley, where different cities and smaller cities, not just the big cities, were actually taking some of this funding and pushing it towards addressing that homelessness issue. We know that when we're talking about homelessness, we also got to talk about mental health, and that's why we're always focusing there as well. The legislature is still focusing on trying to create more affordable housing. There's a Senate package, there's an Assembly package, there's a bunch of packages out there of everybody trying to address this. So whether you're looking at something as simple as adding another ADU to your existing house to build another bedroom.
By the way, known as granny flats.
The granny flats, right? I know. I was going to say, the mother-in-law quarters.
That's right.
So, whether it's something like that, or actually just making sure that when you're using those mixed use or repurposing things, whether it's an old mall or box retail, that we're actually addressing these issues that we need to solve regionally.
You're kind of touching on another issue. You said mental health is also just the general health issue. So, Senator Caballero, I'm going to ask you about that. How do we address improving Valley health outcomes?
That is really important. So I think one of the issues is going to be the expansion of healthcare alternatives for populations that heretofore have not been able to participate. The legislature has, over the past couple of years, included undocumented workers younger students so that they can end up on their parents' insurance, and the elderly. And so we need to continue kind of mining away at that and trying to include as many people as possible. Taking care of the health of everyone in the community benefits the entire community. And I think this COVID pandemic has shown us more than anything ever could, that we're all in this together and we all benefit when the health of the community is better.
You know, aren't you supporting SB, I think it's 697 on the physician's assistance?
Yes.
Expansion of that. Could you just describe that very briefly?
Yes. So that bill passed and was signed by the governor, and that bill provided an opportunity for physicians' assistants have to be supervised by doctors, and it limits the kind of work that they can do independently. And what the bill does is it provides them an opportunity to work a little bit more independently from the doctor. So, for example, they could be located in an office somewhere else, as long as the doctor is reviewing the decisions that the PA does. And so it's a different. It's working within their licensing, but it gives them a little bit more flexibility.
Provides a little more flexibility. Okay, we're
yes,
going to continue.
And it provides an opportunity to send them out to rural communities that have no medical access and no pharmacies, and it's tremendously important.
Very good. Okay, we're going to continue this conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We now want to get the Republican perspective on some of the big issues that predated the COVID pandemic and are sure to be with us after the COVID pandemic is over. Our guests are Republican Assembly Member Keith Flora from Ripon and State Assembly Member Devin Mathis from Visalia. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thanks for having us.
So, Assemblyman Flora, I want to ask you first, we spoke with your Democratic colleagues about the state's ongoing challenges. And the first thing we talked about was basically affordable housing and homelessness. I'm just wondering what can be done to address those problems?
I think one of the issues that we've had in the past, and since I've gotten here, I've been here on my 5th year now, is we tend to address these issues with very broad strokes. And a lot of times what we're seeing is these are much more regional issues. The folks that are homeless or housing issues that are affecting my district are very, very different than the homeless folks that are in San Francisco. And we don't tend to look at it that way as a legislator. We tend to look at it as one size fits all. And we can do one thing in San Francisco and it'll trickle down into the Central Valley and we'll be able to make that work. And in reality, it simply doesn't. I think you look at what San Diego has done in the past, which was a little bit outside the norm, where you'd come from a mindset of we do have a responsibility to care for these people, to love these people, to try to get them out of the weather, to get them the help that they need. But if you tell them that there is a location and you build the facilities and then they refuse to go, there needs to be consequences to that as well. And so I kind of have this hybrid approach where I think we are responsible to get them the shelter that they need, but then there's an enforcement side of this that has to be done as well.
Yeah, Mathis, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think, Mr. Flora touched quite a bit on a lot of the problems with it. I think the other part is also looking at a triage type mentality on the mental health side. What are the mental health pieces that cause them to go homeless? Is it drug addiction? Is it drug addiction that has caused the mental health issue? And we also have to address those pieces of this as well. Because people are homeless for multiple different reasons. They have different things going on that led them to there. One of the other things also that's not talked about enough is the cost of living in California. And, the cost of living here continues to rise. And instead of doing things to bring that cost down, all we ever hear about is, well, let's increase minimum wage, which we know just creates more inflation. And we need to be looking at bringing the cost of living down.
Yeah. Well, you asked, it's a good segue for the next question I want to ask you, Assemblyman Mathis, and that is about healthcare. It's an ongoing problem for a lot of Valley communities, both urban and rural. Is there anything the Republicans, you're in a tough spot because they're a minority party. Is there anything that you guys can propose or support to address that issue?
Well, it's Dr. Joaquin Arambula, one of our other Valley Assembly members. Him and I both sit on Budget Sub 1, along with Assembly Member Patterson. And we work pretty bipartisanly on a lot of these issues. And so it's not really so much of what we can introduce, What I really look at is the function of the programs that we have. How are they working? Are people able to use them? What are the mechanics of them and how we can make them better?
Yeah, kind of focusing on the efficiency issue. Member Flora, what are your thoughts on this issue of adequate health care for Valley communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's a well-known fact that, we have an access problem. For many, many years, we tend to fight about insurance, having insurance, make sure it's single payer, whatever that conversation looks like, however it's shaped for that particular day or for that particular argument. At the end of the day, my constituents have issues with access. So until we can bring access to the Central Valley, until I can have dialysis clinics, in every community, until we can have a cardiologist, in every other community, we have an access problem. And it's something, go ahead.
You're bringing up a really good point, and it kind of dovetails with another idea, and that is kind of the digital divide, right? A lot of folks now are using telemedicine. I mean, is that maybe another way to get at this issue, improve access, broadband access in the Valley?
100%. I think if there is any positives that we can take out of COVID, it's rip that Band-Aid off of what telehealth is. And some of the proponents of it previously are now understanding it's literally the only way that they can serve their patients. So that weird misnomer about what telehealth was going to do, and how people are going to get paid versus a brick and mortar. Those are all conversations that we still have to have. But people are absolutely becoming more comfortable with having a conversation with their primary care doctor over. But I will also say that people also need to go to the doctor. They need brick and mortar buildings, brick and mortar doctors' offices have not been replaced. Telehealth is just a good tool.
Yeah, I will say this. I have tried telehealth myself. It's interesting. It's a brave new world. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more about some of the big issues confronting the state of California and the Republican perspective. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with two Valley Democratic legislators, Democratic Senator Andreas Caballero and Democratic State Assemblymember Rudy Salas, about some of the big issues that are confronting the state, that were confronting the state prior to the pandemic, or sure to be here after the pandemic is over. So, Senator Caballero, I want to ask you about criminal justice. Really big issue, major topic prior to the pandemic. What, if anything, do you think needs to be done to improve public safety?
Well, there were a number of bills last year that were proposed, and with the COVID virus raging, we had to cut our session a little bit short. And so I believe a lot of those bills are going to be coming back. I did a bill a couple of years ago, SB 230, that sets up a training obligation, and it's become operative this January. All police departments need to learn de-escalation strategies. There's new obligations to report instances of use of force that is excessive, to supervisors the responsibility to report it, to report it and to investigate it. And so there are a lot of new requirements, and I expect we'll continue to see that. I know there's interest in improved educational requirements, whether it's a AA or a BA, and I know that there are more issues have been raised because of some of the instances we see happening all over the country.
I know Assemblymember Salas has a bill. Could you explain the bill you have on criminal justice?
Yeah, no, thank you. This law enforcement issue isn't going away. And, what we saw even before the pandemic, right, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the individual rallies and protests that we saw, not just across the state of California, but across the country. This is an issue that's not going to go away. Just because we have the pandemic doesn't mean these other issues fall to the wayside. We still need to focus on them. I've introduced legislation, Assembly Bill 60, which we're calling the Law Enforcement Accountability Act. And it's addressing some of those issues that people were highlighting during their protests. And it's things that we've seen in our communities. I know we've seen it here in the Central Valley, for instance, when a peace officer, a cop basically is doing something wrong, and what they do is they end up resigning instead of the investigation actually coming to completion. And what we found is a lot of times those cops that were going to be under investigation or were under investigation resigned, and a lot of times they end up in some of our valley cities and towns. And what we said is, like, that's not right. Why should we have to bear the burden in the Central Valley of these individuals that have questionable pasts without the investigation going to completion? So this bill, Assembly Bill 60, one of the provisions, and there does a couple of other things as well, but one of them is to make sure that investigations are done to completion so that when they go to another city, they actually have a complete report and can make the decision like, hey, do we want to hire somebody that's had 2, 3, sometimes even 4 questionable misconduct charges? Because do the taxpayers in that city want to bear that responsibility if something goes wrong?
Yeah, and I'm going to switch gears completely on you, some of them, Rudy Salas. I want to ask you about just the transition in the energy industry. You know, you see GM saying that they're not going to produce any more internal combustion engine cars by 2035. Obviously, it's going to have a big impact on the South Valley and Kern County. You know, what's the state doing to help Kern County and the South Valley transition from a fossil fuel economy to a green economy?
You know, I've been talking with the governor directly and the administration about this for a number of years now. How are we going to do this? Because at the end of the day, what I tell the administration and the previous governor and this governor is we want to make sure that people still have good paying jobs. And when you look at the energy industry, that's where they have great paying jobs and the skills to actually do that. That's why we've also been pushing legislation on bioenergy. I don't know if you just saw the recent media report on the growing amount of bioenergy and biofuels, refineries and plants actually going up and actually throughout the Central Valley. And so we've been pushing that. We'll have legislation this year that actually helps streamline that. Assembly Bill 322. We had one last year that was signed into law. But it's really, you know, how are we going to provide those good paying jobs? And whether it's in one sector or another, if it's in energy, we need it here in the state of California.
Yeah, and I think people understand that Kern County is an energy county, and it's more than just fossil fuels. They've got, you know, large solar farms and wind farms and a lot of other things.
I'm sorry. I was going to say the Central Valley's not only has the petroleum, but it's got wind, it's got solar, and then now we're actually even looking at carbon sequestration projects out on the west side. And so, you know, the Central Valley can be a mecca for energy for the rest of the state and really the country.
I want to end up on a very positive note here. Senator Caballero, I want to ask you, I mean, a lot of people say bipartisanship is dead, yet you've introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Borgeas from Fresno, the Keep California Working Act. I mean, are we going to see more of that in the future? We've only got about 10 seconds, but I want to get your perspective.
Yes.
Okay.
I expect that you will. And we're working really hard at trying to solve the problems that we have in the Valley, and we need to do it together.
That's great. I'm going to end on a very positive note. Thank you very much for being with us. Up next, what is the Republican response to some of these intractable state issues? We'll hear from 2 Valley legislators next. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with 2 Republican Valley legislators, Republican State Assemblymember Keith Flora from Ripon and Republican State Assemblymember Devin Mathis from Visalia, to get their perspective on some of the big issues confronting California. Senator Flora, I want to ask you about a big issue prior to the pandemic, and that was criminal justice reform. So what's the answer here? Is it spending more money on public safety, or is it improving the existing use of the resources that we already have for public safety?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the answer is a little bit of both, to be quite frank. I think that the concept of defunding the police is an absolutely horrible idea. But I also know that our law enforcement community is ready and willing to make some changes that they also feel is necessary, some changes that have been, you know, long time coming. And so I'm excited about that. But some of those changes, new curriculum requires money. It requires resources. So I absolutely support, you know, funding the police, and I absolutely support their willingness to make a few changes in life and how we you know, police our communities.
Yeah, Senator Mathis, I mean, you know, what Senator Flores is talking about are things I think like, you know, improving training, providing more money for that. There's another issue that is kind of a sensitive issue, and that is perhaps streamlining the disciplinary process. The police unions are going to have a say about that. I mean, what are your thoughts on improving the criminal justice system?
Well, it's a lot of what Mr. Flora already said. You know, some of the great programs that I see that we need to do more of are things like my local sheriff, Mike Boudreaux, does. You know, they opened up sports leagues in disadvantaged communities where our law enforcement officers are actually the coaches and out there and changing that mentality that the police are bad and really breaking that cycle and that thought process. So people know that, you know, these are role models. These are people we can go talk to. These are people that are here to help us versus having a different mentality about it.
Yeah. The police athletic leagues have been around for a long time, and maybe what's old will be new again. I want to ask both of you about the issue of wildfires, a huge issue in California, becoming more so. Senator Flora, I'll start with you first. You know, 2 questions. One is, does man-made climate change have anything to do with the intensity and frequency of wildfires? And two, how do we address the issue?
So the answer to the first question is yes, it does. I also know, having spent decades fighting these fires, that there are three things that sustain fires. It's oxygen, it's fuel, and it's ignition. You take one of those three things away, a fire goes out. The only thing that we can control is the vegetation side of things, the fuel load. And for hundreds of years, our Native American friends have shown us the way to do this properly, where they go and we burn these small, very low intensity undergrowth fires, and we clean out our forest floors. We take out the trees that are touching each other so we don't get fires that run across the canopies. All of these things we can do, and we know how to do it if we had the political will. Sadly, some of our environmental friends do not like to see that or hear that, but it's something that we're working through currently. But there is a pathway.
You're touching on a very important point. There was a Little Hoover Commission report about this very issue, and the whole idea that for 100 years we follow this fire suppression model when we really should be thinking about these prescribed burns as a possible solution. Of course, there's an air pollution question as well, but those things need to be addressed. Assemblymember Mathis, what are your thoughts on wildfire?
The prescribed burn aspect, we also need to look at other mitigations about, opening up grazing. There's the old saying of, log it, graze it, or watch it burn. And it's very true. And there's a reason why that's out there.
Yes, that's an issue I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of. Senator Floyd, I want to end with you on this quick note about, the possibility of bipartisanship. I mean, Democrats have both houses in the California legislature by a large margin, frankly. But there's been some bipartisan attempts. There's this SB 74, Keep California Working Act, a $2.6 billion grant for small businesses. Is that the start of bipartisanship in the California legislature?
Oh, I think it's one of the most bipartisan bills I've seen since I've been elected. Senator Borgeas, Senator Caballero did an incredible job with SB 74. And it was very, very sad because at the last moment, because of politics, Senator Borges' name was stripped off that bill and Senator Menn's name was put on. And the governor made it very, very clear that he would not allow a Republican to be a joint author on such a great piece of legislation. Well, even though Senator Borges and Senator Caballero had worked together across the state, got over 64 of us electeds in both houses to sign on as co-authors because of politics.
That's unfortunate, and hopefully people still know who really did the work on that bill. I want to thank our guests, Assemblymember Mathis, Assemblymember Flora, for being here, as well as Democratic Assembly members Rudy Salas and Democratic State Senator Anna Caballero. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.